Dr. Voigtkin is a priest in the Temple of Set and master of the esoteric order of Beelzebub. With a PhD in psychoanalytic studies and focus on creativity, art, and imagination as tools for initiation, his work bridges ritual, psychology, and esotericism. While researching lately, I came across Dr. Keen's paper exploring Set as a manifestation of the Jungian self in its most violent and transformative form. As a student of Qabalah, that got me thinking, what if Set isn't some distant or isolated god or limited to the Qliphoth, but rather expressed in the very structure of the Tree of Life? What if he can be viewed as a unifying principle helping us overcome stagnation and entropy? In this one, I'll share reflections for anyone drawn to Set, but rooted in the Qabalistic system. Based on common sense, they are not said to be true by any actual scholars or high adepts, so feel free to take them with a grain of salt. And if you need magic manuals or diagrams, or struggle with hunger, body weight, or discipline, check my books and digital stores. You'll likely find something useful. The violent self. Keen interprets Set through the Jungian concept of the self, the totality of the psyche with collective and universal aspects. As an archetype, the self unifies polarities, the light and the shadow, the king and the adversary, the builder or savior and the destroyer, etc. Psychological upheaval. Jung believed that the self, when encountered in full force, is often overwhelming. Keen refers to Bangor University philosophy professor Lucy Huskinson. In her work on its violent nature, she describes the self as a force that breaks down everything the ego thought was stable, so it can rebuild something real. From such an angle, Set isn't just god of darkness, but the force of psychological upheaval. It brings the black flame not as a gift of pleasure, but as a fire you have to survive. The Setian path is not about comfort or worship. It is about confrontation with the unknown self and the will to reshape and transform. Keen also refers to Don Webb's The Essential Guide to the Left-Hand Path, which reveals that while the gift helped us advance in many ways, it brought fear, dread, and anxiety. And since these are all Gebura, this brings us to the Tree of Life. Binah. Set abhors stagnation and limitations that are really Saturn Binah. Associated with things like the academia, Binah translates into a stasis or stability from which there is little to no progress. Think of the atom, for instance. Set and the three pillars. Qabalistically, the shadow is part of the nefesh, the personal subconscious, which resides in Yesod, the sphere of the moon. The self or neshama sits in Tiferet, which is above Yesod. Based on the three pillars division, the middle pillar is of light and consciousness, whereas the side two of function. The key detail is that while only the side pillars can do the heavy lifting, they need to be illuminated or engaged by the middle pillar. It is what separates the mystic from the practical occultist. The first stays in the middle pillar, the second engages the whole tree, which seems to be aligned with the Setian path and the notion of Set as the unifier of ideas and opposites. Build and destroy. Engaging the polarity pillars happens through Tiferet, which Dion Fortune calls the transformative switch. With perfect proportions of spirit and matter, Tiferet is the most balanced point in the tree, a god among humans. Tiferet is also the synthesis of Hesed and Gebura, which are quite similar to the 5%ers build destroy. Now, while exclusive to black people, the goal of the 5% is apotheosis, which is also that of the left-hand path. With all this, engaging the darker aspects of the self isn't necessarily limited to the nefesh. It includes the somewhat latent yet mighty side pillars most people keep in the dark. Conflict. Set is violent, which implies conflict, Gebura. Set's counterpart is Horus, a god of vengeance and war, which is associated with Gebura. Hesed and Gebura are linked by the path of Leo, which figuratively speaking is the most conflicting point in the tree. The Telemic Libervi, which implies confrontation, positions you on the path of Leo, and if you think about it, the 11th-fold seal, Libervi's first gesture, resembles engaging opposites. Leo is the single sign ruled by the sun, the mundane chakra or the practical aspect of Tiferet. Leo is also the strength card which Crowley associates with the power of taming wild beasts. The wild beasts are really aspects of your psyche that have been sabotaging you majorly, but quietly. The Tower. On the lower arc we have Hod and Netzach, linked by the Tower card, the path of Pe, Mars aka Gebura. Gebura eliminates and destroys that which no longer serves a purpose. The Tower card really destroys false structures. The Lesser Pentagram moves us from Malkut mundane consciousness to the intersection of Samek and Pe. The idea is that before experiencing higher principles and currents, we first need to get rid of crap and psychic entropy accumulated in mundane life. Fighting stagnation. Going back to Saturn Binah, besides stagnation, that also rules entropy and randomness, and Malkuth sits on the throne of Binah, by the way. What counteracts Saturn are Hesed Jupiter and Gebura Mars. Hesed, the principle of perpetual change and growth, expands beyond the existing forms of Saturn. Gebura destroys, eliminates, and burns out the forms that interfere with and stagnate process. Saturn again. Due to the myth of Kronos, Jupiter often tends to get all the credit for overcoming Saturn, as it's the primary initiator of change. However, each Sephira exists in the context of the tree, while the side pure Sephiroth are pairs of opposites. There's really no Chokmah without Binah, no Hesed without Gebura. Creative sacrifice. Quote, adjectives used to describe the self in this numerous capacity include awfulness, overpoweringness, urgency, and violence. Violence for Huskinson occurs when the ego is exposed to the creative forces of the self that seek to destroy the inferior ego orientation with its tendency to prejudice in order to create a more affluent and well-balanced ego orientation. The self, therefore, constitutes a primordial experience of the visionary mode of artistic creation. The violence describes the destruction necessary to initiate the vital creative process of individuation, and the self is violent because it is experienced as an overwhelming force that violates the self-contained ego and forces the ego, often against its will, into a new identity. Once more we have built and destroy, radical transformation, and creativity and change. Necessary destruction coupled with visionary or big picture thinking, which is really Jupiter partnering with Mars. Set can be seen as the very principle that lets you leverage both forces rather than being leveraged by them like most people are. Muppets of the Qabalah. Quote, by attempting to avoid delving into the unconscious, one runs the risks of psychological stasis, becoming a puppet suspended by the psychological strings, that is, until something comes along to disrupt the perceived calm. Unquote. Everyone can be viewed as a Muppet of the Sephiroth. By increasing our understanding of their impact, we increase control through self-knowledge. An approach helping with that comes from Phyllis Sequer. Sequer advocated accomplishing balance not by the traditional or conventional excess banishings, but by emphasizing your deficits, especially of Hesed and Gebura. If you tend to be meek, pushed around, or easily taken advantage of, emphasize Mars. If aggression and mindless conflict dominate you, focus on Hesed. Repeat with Netzach and Hod, or your passions and intellect. The ritual to use is the greater hexagram, a regular or unicursal version, letting you work Pats and Sephiroth as they're basically aspects of the same principles. The collective. Quote, I only know there's no point in wishing to know more of the collective unconscious than one gets through dreams and intuition. The more you know of it, the greater and heavier becomes your moral burden because the unconscious contents transform themselves into individual tasks and duties as soon as they become conscious. Do you want to increase loneliness and misunderstanding? Do you want more and more complications and increasing responsibilities? The Setian answer to these questions, as well as anyone working with the darker or deeper approach to individuation, would be yes. Unquote. In my humble opinion, and that is just an opinion, a rite that does that is the Supreme Pentagram. By rending the veil from the position of Samek and Pe, the SRP lets you experience global, transgenerational currents and egregores expressed through cultural and political ideas, and perhaps more. You have names derived from Hesed and Gebura, such as transpersonal concepts that are the zodiac signs working through the personal elements of the microcosm, which is you. Rending the veil is really an apocalypse. Once you see, you cannot unsee, and the actual truth can be disturbing. For instance, rather than being boundless and free, the internet turned out to have a new iron veil in the face of algorithms pushing your content to the wrong people and places, and even presenting themselves as actual people, as also noticed by Yuval Noah Harari. For creators outside the US, UK or Canada, that could be quite disturbing, yet it is true. Hardwired notions about who you are also start losing ground as metals start melting. Either way, you have to confront that, or whatever it is, if you are to embrace it or simply become more complete and aware. But that's just my opinion. Thank you for your time.